Today I'm adding a message to our topic on the Pre-millennial Kingdom of God. And this would be part 11 of that topic. And we are talking about the end of iniquity, part 1. Now, our world faces problems. And not just problems from natural disasters, like viruses and so forth, but also problems caused by the wickedness and iniquity of human beings. We all perhaps have wondered at times why God allows iniquity to prevail and to continue on earth. And today we're going to face the reality that the Bible teaches that in fact this will not always be the case. God is someday going to bring an end to iniquity. So we are discussing the end of iniquity. And what is iniquity? That's question number 1. Well, understand that iniquity is perverseness. Iniquity is when men are contrary to God in all that they do, paying no attention to his precepts and refusing to do what he has said. Now, because of the iniquity of Adam's race, everything in this world seems to be in chaos. And some say the way to deal with this is stronger laws. Stronger laws will bring an end to iniquity. And yet stronger laws just seem to fill our prisons, but crime doesn't stop. And it seems like too often our prisons become schools for training minor criminals to become major ones. So, our system doesn't seem to work. And so the question is, what in the world will stop iniquity? And I think we have to realize the fact that no human efforts are ever going to stop iniquity on earth, because iniquity is something that is inherent in the human heart, the fallen human heart. Now, if this iniquity of this world is ever going to end, there is only one who is able to do it. There's only one who could do it. There's only one who will do it. And that is God. Now, when it comes to God, with his eternal, infinite power, with the fact that he has the ability to do all things, the question is not, can he end iniquity? Because of course he can. God can do whatever he sets his mind to do. God can do whatever he desires to do, and determines and plans and purposes to do. So there is no question, can God end iniquity on earth? Of course he can. The question is not can he, but will he? Will God end iniquity on earth? And to answer this question, we're going to turn to the Bible, the Word of God. And we're going to see, does the Bible declare that God is going to end iniquity? And we're going to see that in fact it does. The Bible declares the end of iniquity. We'll start out today looking at the book of Psalms, and what the book of Psalms has to say on God ending iniquity. And the first psalm we're going to look at is Psalm 5, starting in verse 4. Psalm 5, starting in verse 4, says, "For thou art not a God that hath pleasure in wickedness, neither shall evil dwell with thee. The foolish shall not stand in thy sight. Thou hatest all workers of iniquity. Thou shalt destroy them that speak leasing. The Lord will abhor the bloody and deceitful man." Now, leasing, there are them that speak leasing, that's falsehood. So this talks about the fact that God has no pleasure in wickedness. Evil will not dwell with him. And when we talk about a dwelling, I am in my home, in my dwelling, and what happens if I find that in my dwelling that I take no pleasure in, that I refuse to let dwell with me, that I don't want to allow to stand, that I hate, that I want to destroy, and that I abhor? What am I going to do with that thing? I'm going to get it out of my home. I'm going to get it out of my dwelling, aren't I? I'm going to refuse to continue to live with it. And the fact is that in God's creation, remember, all creation belongs to him. He made it all. He made this world. He made the earth. He made everything in the earth. And if we find that there is that in the earth in which God has no pleasure, with which he refuses to dwell, and yet remember, someday he is going to dwell on earth, that he won't allow to stand, that he hates, that he wants to destroy, and that he abhors, what can we conclude but that God is someday going to get rid of that thing out of his creation? Well, I believe that God is going to do it, but the question is when? When will God destroy those who speak falsehood? When will he show his hatred for the workers of iniquity? Some say it will be at the final judgment, when God comes back to destroy the world, send all the wicked off to hell, take all the righteous to heaven. That's when God will end iniquity. But is that really what the Bible has to say about it? Well, let's keep looking in the book of Psalms. This Psalm 5 was a Psalm of David, and so is Psalm 7. Psalm 7 and verse 9, another Psalm of David. We'll see what David says here about the end of iniquity. Psalm 7 and verse 9. David says, "Oh, let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, but establish the just. For the righteous God trieth the hearts and reins." And the rein is the inner being, the will, the controlling element. Now, there's no doubt about it that this is a prayer. David prays to God to let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end, and let the just, the righteous, be established. But see, I believe in something called the prayer prophecy principle. And that is, we know that when we pray, we're generally asking God to do something. Asking God for something. And yet the fact is that when an inspired author of the Bible prays, when he prays by inspiration of God, he prays because God told him to pray and told him what to pray. But that prayer is just different from my prayer. I'm just asking God for something. He may or may not do it. But when an inspired author prays asking God to do something, that prayer actually becomes a prophecy. It's something that God wants to do, something that God desires to do, and something that God will do in his good time. So I believe every prayer given by divine inspiration becomes a prophecy of what God is going to do. When God is asked to do something, it becomes a prophecy of what he's going to do. So he says, "Oh, let the wickedness of the wicked come to an end." And just think about the wickedness that covers this globe, that covers this earth, that we see everywhere on every hand, and that we see so much of in the governments of this world. And not just the governments, but in the individual common people, in everyone. Is this wickedness ever going to come to an end? I believe it is. The wickedness of the wicked is going to end. Now, of course, ending could be two ways. I believe it will be two ways. One way it could end is by the wicked being destroyed. Then he couldn't be wicked anymore. The other way it could end would be by the wicked being changed. So he doesn't want to be wicked anymore. So his heart is changed, and he becomes like God and doesn't desire and doesn't do wickedness anymore. And God could change and bring an end to the wickedness of the wicked either way. Now Psalm 9, let's look at Psalm 9 and see what it has to say about the end of iniquity. Another Psalm of David. And we'll look at it starting in verse 7. It says, "But the Lord shall endure forever. He hath prepared his throne for judgment." Now the Lord shall endure forever. That word endure is rather poorly translated from the Hebrew, because that word for endure actually means to sit as a king in Hebrew. And then forever is the Hebrew word olam, which means for the outflow or outflowingly. So this tells us that Jehovah shall sit as a king for the outflow. And to sit as a king, of course, means to take his position as an absolute ruler for the outflow. And it says, "For he hath prepared his throne for judgment." That doesn't mean he's prepared a fancy chair to sit in. A throne symbolizes a seat of authority. He's made his seat of authority ready in order to judge, for judgment. Now understand, judgment is not what so many in theology make it to mean, punishment. Rather, to judge means to determine what's right, and then to set things right. To decide what the order should be, and then set things in order. So God prepares his seat of authority in order to set things in order the way they should be. And what happens because of this? Verse 8, and he shall judge the world in righteousness. He shall minister judgment to the people in uprightness. The Lord is going to judge, to set the world in order in righteousness. Righteousness is going to be the standard, not wickedness, not sin, not selfishness, not the selfishness of selfish people as the world is set in order today, basically based on human selfishness. But he is going to set the world in order with righteousness as the standard. And he is going to minister, serve out judgment to the people in uprightness. He's going to serve the people with right judgment, with true order, in uprightness. No corruption, no underhandedness about this. And the result is, verse 9, the Lord also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. So often our governments in our day provide no refuge, no sanctuary for the oppressed. They're more concerned with schmoozing and getting the approval of the powerful. And they don't care so much about the weak and oppressed. In fact, sometimes the governments of this day are the ones who are oppressing the oppressed. And yet when the Lord is going to judge the world in righteousness and minister, serve judgment to the people in uprightness, he will become a refuge, a hiding place, a shelter for the oppressed, and a refuge in times of trouble. And they will have the help they need in that day. Now, skipping on the same psalm down to verse 19. Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. Let the heathen be judged in thy sight. Now, this is another case, I believe, of a prayer prophecy principle, because this is a prayer. I believe it becomes a prophecy of what God is going to do. Otherwise, he wouldn't have inspired the prayer. Now, arise, O Lord, doesn't mean stand up from a prone position, but it means to go into action, O Lord. See, right now, the Lord could do so much more than he's doing to straighten out this world, to right the wrongs, to make this world a better place, to put an end to wickedness and iniquity. But he's not acting to do that. He's acting to show forth the riches of his grace. But the psalmist here calls on God to go into action and let not man prevail. Don't let man win. Now, the fact is that man today is seeking to prevail over God, seeking to win over God in many, many ways. In his morals, for example. Man wants to substitute his own atheist morality, which in some ways I would sum up as the one-at-a-time rule. You can do whatever you want sexually as long as it's one at a time. So he wants to substitute his own morals. Love justifies everything. Every sexual act is justified by quote-unquote love. He wants to substitute his morals over God's moral standards. He wants to overthrow God's word as a worthless book. Say it's just old, it's out of date, or it's not fully inspired, or inspired at all, or parts of it are inspired. You can't trust it. Overthrow his word as a worthless book. And he wants to set the world in order without any consideration of God whatsoever. Yes, man wants to win over God. And yet the psalmist prays, let not man prevail. And God isn't going to let man win. Let the heathen be judged in thy sight. But that's not heathen, that's nations. See, the way God is not going to let man win is by setting the nations in order himself. He's going to take control of the governments. He's going to set the world in order. That's how he's not going to let this world win. That's how he's not going to let man win. Then he says, verse 20, put them in fear, O Lord, that the nations may know themselves to be but men. Selah. So he calls on God to put them in fear. And the fact is that the nations don't want to fear or respect God. That the nations may know themselves to be but men. See, the nations want to think more of themselves. This is how I would sum up Adam's race. It's a race of children. I mean, look at the book of Genesis, where Adam lived nearly 1,000 years, and all those before the flood lived nearly 1,000 years. We don't even live 100. We're children. And even 1,000 years, sure, God meant us to live forever. We are really children. All of us. I don't care who you are. If you're 90-something years old watching me, you're a child compared to what God intended. You're a child. You haven't even reached a century. Halfway respectable after a century or two. We're all children. And we walk around with a sword dangling over our heads, ready to fall at any time. The sword of death. We don't want to admit it, but it could happen at any time. You could choke on a little piece of meat, and that would be the end of you. A little tiny thing could end your life. I don't care how young you are. You could die. One wrong move with the steering wheel of your car, or someone else's wrong move if you're riding with someone else, or someone else's wrong move like the car coming the other way, and your life could end. You have a sword hanging over your head, and you don't know when it's going to fall, but it's going to fall at some point. And yet here is Adam's race, a race of children, a sword dangling over their heads ready to fall at any time, and yet they walk around imagining they're gods. Walk around imagining they're gods. And that certainly sums up the atheists of today. But really, that's man's attitude in general. And the nations, the governors, the rulers of this world especially seem to think that they're gods. Seem to think that they're above the common herd, that they're greater than everyone else, that they're the exception, that they are special and above common men. Yes, the rulers tend to think of themselves as little g gods. And yet, they need to know that they're just men. And someday God will act so they see it. Nations are not gods, they're just men judging men. And someday they'll be made to know this. You are nothing but a man telling other men what to do. And you didn't know any better really than they did. And they'll see that when God starts to govern, how much better his government is than theirs ever was. Let's go on to Psalm 10. This psalm is not credited, but it continues very closely on Psalm 9, so I still tend to think it's David, just like Psalm 9. And so we'll look at Psalm 10, starting in verse 15. Break thou the arm of the wicked and the evil man. Seek out his wickedness till thou find none. Again, this is speaking to God. And I would take this as being the prayer prophecy principle. Asking God to do this means someday he is going to do this. Now, to break the arm of the wicked and evil men means to break their strength. Break the strength of the wicked and calamity-causing man. Break his strength so he can't do these wicked and calamitous things anymore. Seek out his wickedness till you find none. Get rid of all his wickedness. Like I said, you can do that in two ways. By putting him to death, then he can't be wicked anymore. Or by changing him from the inside. And which method God uses, in some ways, depends on the heart of the wicked one, whether he will turn to God and submit or not. But when is God going to break the arm of the wicked and seek out his wickedness till he finds none? Verse 16, the Lord is king forever and ever. The heathen are perished out of his land. He will break the arm of the wicked and seek out his wickedness till he finds none when he is king. When he sits, when he stands, when he reigns as king for the olam, for the outflow. From then on, outflowingly. Then the heathen, the nations are perished out of his land. That's not heathen, that's nations. And see, God's land, the land of Israel, is meant for Israelites. And yet right now there are plenty of nations other than Israel there. There are plenty of Muslim nations. And to be quite frank, there are plenty of Christians there who have their various churches and chapels and so forth of all kinds of Christian denominations, Catholic and Protestant denominations, who have their little piece of Jerusalem and insist upon it. Well, these nations are all going to perish out of his land. Now notice it doesn't say that these nations perish, that every last individual in these nations has to die. No, it's just they have to perish out of his land. They have to leave. They have to get out. I don't care if they're Christians and they have a traditional church there. They have to get out because this land is going to be for Israel. Verse 17, Lord, thou hast heard the desire of the humble. Thou wilt prepare their heart. Thou wilt cause thine ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that the man of the earth may no more oppress. So God hears the desire of the humble. Their desire to see a better world than this one, I would say. You will prepare their hearts for that world, cause your ear to hear them, and then judge, set in order the fatherless and the oppressed. See, the fatherless back then were the protectorless, really. Because your father was your protector. He was the one who could watch out for you. Your mother really couldn't do it. Women really didn't have much opportunity to be a protector. It was the father who was the protector. And so someone without a father had no protector. And the oppressed, the same thing, those weak who have no way of being protected. God is going to judge, set in order their cause. Today, often the protectorless are harmed. And even today, where women maybe have more power than they used to, still, who do sexual predators seek out? Children without a father in the home. Yes, still the fatherless are often the ones who are mistreated and oppressed. But God is going to judge the cause of the fatherless and oppressed, the protectorless, the helpless. And the result is the man of the earth may no more oppress. Those who oppress and harm the protectorless won't be able to get away with it anymore when he sits as king. So again, this is showing us the end of iniquity. There is oppression in many places today. In many cases, people just have to suffer it. They have no choice. They just have to endure it if they can. But this condition of things is going to end. Let's go on. Psalm 37, our next psalm, talking about the end of iniquity. Psalm 37. And let's look at verse 9. Psalm 37, verse 9 says, For evildoers shall be cut off, but those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. This tells us that evildoers, and evil, ra'ah in Hebrew, has to do with those who do calamity, who cause calamity causing people. And usually those who cause calamity, it's through sin and wickedness, true. Those who cause calamity through their sin, they'll be cut off, he says. For those that wait upon the Lord, they shall inherit the earth. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that the earth is all theirs, every single part of it. You can only have one person who owns the entire earth, and that's God. So those that wait on the Lord doesn't mean that each of them individually will be the absolute ruler over earth. But to inherit means to have a place and enjoy a portion. There are Christians today who talk like they can hardly wait to be cut off from the earth. This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. See, they want to be out of this earth. They want to be cut off from it. And yet this verse tells us it's the evildoers who are going to be cut off from the earth. And those who wait on the Lord are going to have a portion in it. And the fact is that the portion we're going to have is not in a corrupted earth like this one, but in the earth after God ends iniquity. So we go on to verse 17 of Psalm 37. For the arms of the wicked shall be broken, but the Lord upholdeth the righteous. And again, the arms of the wicked is the strength of the wicked. And why would those who wait on the Lord want a portion in the earth the way it is now? See, their portion is going to be in the earth after he breaks the strength, the power of the wicked. And when he breaks the power of the wicked, he's also going to uphold, strengthen, give power to the righteous. See, often today, people who are righteous don't have much power. Their righteousness doesn't necessarily lead to them being king of the earth, or anything like that, having freedom and independence. Often their righteousness leads to oppression. But in this day, the Lord is going to uphold and give strength to the righteous. Verse 22. For such as be blessed of him shall inherit the earth, and they that be cursed of him shall be cut off. See how plain that is? It doesn't say that this world is just my home. Sorry, it doesn't say this world is not my home, I'm just a passing through. No, it says those who are cut off from the earth are cursed by God. Those who are blessed of him have a portion in the earth. And that's because he's going to end iniquity on earth. That's why they'd want to have a portion in it. Then finally, verse 38 of Psalm 37. But the transgressors shall be destroyed together. The end of the wicked shall be cut off. So how is iniquity going to be ended? Is it going to be ended through a slow campaign? Is it going to be ended through churches doing kingdom work and slowly making the world a better and better place until finally wickedness is gone? No, that's never going to happen. Sorry, but it's never going to happen. Well, transgressors are going to be destroyed together, all at once, in one sweeping act of God. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean in a split second, but it means in one great act of God. However many years it takes him to do this, he can take as long as he likes doing it, but it's going to be in one great act and event, covering however long it takes. But at one great time, in one great time period, through one great act of God, he is going to destroy all the transgressors. Transgressors are those who rebel and who transgress God's laws and commandments. They're all going to be destroyed through one great action of God. Then the end of the wicked shall be cut off. And there means the reward, the outcome, the just deserts, we might say, of the wicked will be to be cut off, to be brought to an end, to die. Yes, the wicked are going to come to an end all at once in one period of time. Not slowly as each one of them dies. All at once, wickedness is going to be cut off from the earth. Go on to Psalm 46. And this one is an uncredited psalm. We don't know for sure who wrote it, but of course the Holy Spirit was the divine author. It's an important thing. In verse 6, it says, The heathen raged, the kingdoms were moved, he uttered his voice, the earth melted. So the nations raged. And we see that happening so often today, where nations rage. And we see rage in our own nation, the United States, in recent days, in recent time. We see people raging against the government and against what they think is oppression, against, well, our free capitalist society. And the result of the nations raging is that the kingdoms move, the governments totter. They don't seem stable, they don't seem solid, they don't seem dependable. Look at our own government. How many have great confidence in its solidity and dependability right now? And that's the way it's going to be. The nations will be raging, the kingdoms will be tottering. But then he uttered his voice, the earth melted. God is going to speak. He's going to break silence. He's going to utter his voice to the earth. And the earth will hear and it will melt before him. Now the idea of melted here is it becomes fluid like wax. If you take wax and you put it in front of a furnace, what's going to happen to it? It's going to melt and become fluid. And then what can you do with it? You can reshape wax once it's melted and become fluid. You can reshape it. It dries and hardens again, and it has a new shape. So this earth is going to melt before God, and he's going to reshape it as he sees fit. That's what's going to happen. This earth is going to be reshaped. Verse 7, The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. Selah. So, Jehovah of armies is going to be with his people Israel. The God of Jacob, his people, even those who are often heel grabbers, not going the way you want them to go, but he is going to be the refuge for his people Israel. Verse 8, Come behold the works of the Lord, what desolations he hath made in the earth. So the result of all this, of him uttering his voice, the earth melting, and him reshaping it, is what? People are called upon to come and behold his works. What desolations he has made in the earth. But that word desolations could mean astonishing things. And I'll tell you what, when God reshapes the earth the way he wants it to be, there are going to be astonishing things. Just astonishing. Now some people read that desolations and they say, aha, this world is going to be absolutely desolated before God's kingdom. A lot of people teach this. There's going to be a great nuclear war. They're all going to shoot off their weapons. Most of the world is going to be denuded of its inhabitants. But Christ is going to return to Israel and have his kingdom in Israel among his people. Well, the rest of the earth is more or less a destroyed wasteland. There are going to be desolations in the earth. Well, see, I don't believe the Bible ever teaches any such bleak picture of God's kingdom. No, the fact is, well, he tells us what kind of desolations he's going to make in the earth. And it's not the desolation of nuclear war. Look what it says in verse 9. He makes wars to cease unto the end of the earth. He breaketh the bow and cutteth the spear in sunder. He burneth the chariot in the fire. So the kind of desolations he's going to make is to cause war to cease. Now what would happen to the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, Space Force, all these military forces? What would happen to them if God were to make war end? What would happen to all the military bases, all the military colleges, all the military apparatus that exists? It would be desolated, wouldn't it? If there was no war and no more weapons of war, no more purpose for war. If the bow and the spear, bows were broken, the spears were cut, the chariots were burned in the fire. Now, a lot of people say, oh, silly author of the Bible, he thought we'd be using the same weapons today as they were using back then when he talks about bows and spears and chariots. Well, see, the point here is that these are representative weapons. He's saying the weapons will be destroyed. Not really necessarily making a comment on what weapons they'll have at the time. And besides, when you think about it, what is a gun but an advance on a bow? What is a missile but an advance on a spear? What is a tank but an advance on a chariot? See, our weapons aren't really as different from those weapons as we might like to think. But God is going to destroy all the weapons of war. And think about the desolations that we'll make in the earth. Now, I think this doesn't just mean warfare and guns shooting between nations. This means all war. And there are a lot of wars that are a lot smaller than that. For example, there are wars today between political parties. There are wars, say, in groups of people or congregations. Little wars between cities where they're trying to fight. You know, that's happened to my city. They try to fight. And one city wants to annex a certain piece of land from another because it's not incorporated as a city, and the unincorporated city doesn't want them to, so they go through a battle, and maybe the unincorporated city incorporates, and there's this battle between these cities. There are battles in congregations, in groups of Christians. There are wars that go on, sadly, or supposed Christians. Sometimes even real ones have wars. And then there are wars within families. Parts of the family war with other parts of the family. And sometimes, sadly, there are even wars within households. Yet all such wars are going to cease. All of them. Not just the big ones, like World War I and II. All these wars, even the littlest ones, are going to come to an end. This is going to happen when he ends iniquity. In verse 10 is the result. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the heathen. I will be exalted in the earth. So he speaks to these nations that were raging and these kingdoms that were trembling, and he says, be still. Stop raging, stop trembling, be still and know this, that I'm God. And I will be exalted among all you nations. I will be exalted on all the earth. When? As he destroys the place? No. No, as he brings an end to iniquity. As he reigns, as he brings in his kingdom. So this tells of a time to come when God is going to bring iniquity to an end. Even astonishingly, things like war. Wars and even little battles between households. It's all going to end. What an astonishing thing that is. And what a blessed desolation. Wouldn't it be great if war was desolate? Let's move on to Psalm 64. Psalm 64 is another psalm of David. It says, hear my voice, O God, and my prayer. Preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Boy, we have that in our world today. We are afraid. afraid of our enemies, afraid maybe that our own governments are going to turn into our enemies, maybe already are, afraid of what other people are going to do to us. He says, preserve my life from fear of the enemy. Yes, we can pray the same. Verse 2, hide me from the secret counsel of the wicked, from the insurrection of the workers of iniquity. Now, even today, it seems very much to be the case that there are secret plots of the wicked, where they plot to overthrow the righteous and any and all who would stand in any way for righteousness and godliness. It seems that the goal of some is to make everyone just as wicked as they are, and they will never be satisfied anywhere short of having absolute condoning and agreement with their wicked ways. And they wish to destroy anyone who says that their wicked ways are wicked. Look at how they'll lie in wait and attack anyone who doesn't agree with the corrupt, abominable moral standards of today. And this is really the insurrection, the rebellion of the workers of iniquity. See, by doing this, they aren't just promoting modernism or progressivism or whatever it is they want to try to say they're doing. They are really rebelling against God, the God who has different moral standards from theirs, and who says that theirs are corrupt and abominable. Yes, all their secret plots are really rebellion of the wicked against him. Verse 3, who whet their tongue like a sword, and bend their bows to shoot their arrows, even bitter words. How do these wicked people plot against righteousness and rebel? They do it very often by their words. They sharpen their tongues like swords. They prepare their tongues to use words to tear down and destroy the righteous and righteousness. They bend their bows to shoot their arrows. And what are their arrows? They're bitter words. Think of the bitter words that many in our world and in the media and in government will use against anyone who stands up against the wickedness that they say is right and fine and okay and ought to be tolerated and accepted and included. Yes, they prepare to attack the reputation and to destroy the reputation and even the livelihood, if they can, of anyone who does not agree with their perverse form of morality. And what do they use? They use words. Words, words, words to promote and to justify wickedness. Verse 4, that they may shoot in secret at the perfect, suddenly do they shoot at him and fear not. So they shoot secretly, they prepare to destroy, and then suddenly they perform an ambush against the perfect, the mature. See, these people are very immature. Very immature. And they can't stand anyone to be mature when it comes to righteousness. And they prepare to shoot their words at him, and then they do it all of a sudden. And they aren't afraid. They are convinced they can get away with it, that they can destroy any righteous person, anyone who stands up against their wicked corruption. And they don't fear God, and that God might ever take judgment against them and punish them for such actions. Verse 5, they encourage themselves in an evil matter. They commune of laying snares privily. They say, who shall see them? So such people encourage each other in these evil matters. And how many articles do we see in the newspapers or on the internet? How many stories on the radio or television news do we hear? How often do we see written in books that are written for entertainment or entertaining television shows, where people are just encouraged in wickedness and iniquity? Encouraged, oh, you can be this way, it's fine. This is right, this is the way it ought to be, this is the way everyone's doing it. No one should have anything to say against this. So they are constantly encouraging each other to perform evil and wickedness. And they talk with each other of laying snares privily. They have secret plans to trap those who stand up against their wickedness. And they say, who will ever see these traps? They won't even know this is a plot, a scheme, a trap. We'll just turn people against these righteous people, and they'll never look at us and see what we are. Verse 6, they search out iniquities. They accomplish a diligent search. Both the inward thought of every one of them and the heart is deep. So these people search out iniquities. They look for new ways of being wicked. They look for some new trendy type of wickedness. I think about the wickedness that was promoted as being okay and fine and all right, nobody should speak against it, when I was a child. And that became kind of old and passé. Everybody just accepted that, and so we moved on. When I was a young man, the trendy forms of wickedness that we used to say was wrong, and now everybody ought to say is okay, it changed. There was new trendy wickedness that everyone had to accept and agree was all right. And now, as I've gotten older, even that was passé. Even that was old hat. And now we have new trendy forms of wickedness. New corruption and perversion that we need to include and accept and tolerate. Yes, they're constantly searching out the next trendy form of wickedness to support and say is okay. And where will it ever stop? Both were the inward thought of them, every one of them, in the heart is deep. Their hearts are full of such wicked matters. Now this is a sad, depressing picture so far, but look at what verse 7 says. But God shall shoot at them with an arrow. Suddenly shall they be wounded. So what happens to stop such wicked men and their schemes of wickedness? What could stop it? Seems like no human efforts are sufficient to stop it. And what happens is that God stops it. God shoots at them with an arrow. What in the world does that mean? Well, just look back at verse 3. What were their arrows? They're bitter words that they shot against the upright. So God's going to shoot them with an arrow like theirs. But his are not going to be bitter words of wickedness. His are going to be words of truth. They will suddenly be wounded when God strikes them with a word of truth. God will suddenly speak. He will arise. He will go into action. He will shoot the arrow of his word against these wicked people. And what will be the result? His arrow is sharp. It's not a blunt arrow. It doesn't miss. It doesn't bounce off. It wounds them. It wounds them all. They're wounded by this arrow. Verse 8, so they shall make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. All that see them shall flee away. So what's the result of them being wounded by this arrow? It's that they will make their own tongue to fall upon themselves. That means they will give themselves a tongue lashing. Think of the people today who stood up and publicly declared in their entertainment, and declared in their television shows and in their movies, and declared in their media reports, and declared every way they could that wickedness was fine and good and not perverse, that anyone who was against it was perverse, and attacked the wicked and the righteous. And yet suddenly these people made their own tongues to fall upon themselves. Say, how could I have been so insane? How could I have been so perverse? How could I have been so foolish as to have supported such things? Yes. They will ask, how could I have been so blind and insane? And all that see them shall flee away. That may be better translated. All that see them shall shake their heads. Imagine seeing all these people who so vociferously spoke out for wickedness suddenly castigating themselves and tearing themselves down with their own tongues because of this. It's just going to make men shake their heads. Then verse 9, and all men shall fear and shall declare the work of God, for they shall wisely consider of his doings. Everyone's going to be filled with awe and fear and respect. Why? Because they'll recognize this as the work of God. They'll say, only God could have done this. Only God could have changed these people this way. Only God could have brought this about, that some people who were so set on wickedness would now speak against themselves. And they'll declare this as the work of God, and they'll wisely consider it, what he did. They'll think about it. What has God done? And what is he going to do next? Then verse 10, the righteous shall be glad in the Lord and shall trust in him, and all the upright in heart shall glory. So we had what these wicked will do, make their tongues fall on themselves. We had what your common men will do, fear and wisely consider God's work. Then we have what the righteous will do. They'll be glad in the Lord. The Lord has finally done something about wickedness, and they'll trust in him. We can trust God. He's going to take care of things now. He's going to change things here on earth. And all the upright in heart will glory. They'll rejoice. What an exciting time that will be. The end of iniquity. Let's move on to Psalm 92. Psalm 92, again, an unnamed author of this psalm. And we'll look at verse 7. When the wicked spring as the grass, when all the workers of iniquity do flourish, it is that they shall be destroyed forever. So the wicked are springing up like grass springing up in the spring. And they're flourishing like well-watered grass. But he says, when you see this happening, God's just getting ready to destroy them for the outflow. See, the wicked are not going to succeed at taking over the earth and making it only wicked. In spite of their springing up and flourishing, God is going to destroy them all. There's going to be an end of iniquity. Verse 8, but thou, Lord, art most high forevermore. For the outflow, he is high. Nothing is ever going to bring him down. Nothing is ever going to destroy him. Verse 9, for lo, thine enemies, O Lord, for lo, thine enemies shall perish. All the workers of iniquity shall be scattered. So all God's enemies are going to perish, be destroyed, come to an end. All his enemies are going to be scattered, flee from the field of battle, and go away into their own destruction. There's going to be an end of iniquity. God is going to win. The wicked are going to be destroyed. Psalm 104. Another unnamed psalmist. Verse 35. Again, prayer prophecy principle. He prays, let the sinners be consumed out of the earth, and let the wicked be no more. Yes, someday the sinners are going to be consumed out of the earth. The wicked are going to be no more. But again, like I've said, that could be two ways that could happen. Could be by the wicked dying, being destroyed out of the earth that way, the sinners being destroyed that way. Or it could be by their hearts being changed, and them not being wicked anymore. But the wicked are going to be no more. Bless thou the Lord, O my soul, praise ye the Lord. Psalm 107. Another unnamed psalmist. In verse 42. Psalm 107:42. The righteous shall see it and rejoice, and all iniquity shall stop her mouth. Just think of the constant flow, like I said, on radio and on television, in the media, on the internet. Just everywhere, wickedness is talking. The constant chatter of the workers of iniquity. Constantly promoting their wicked, godless perspective. And yet when God makes an end of iniquity, the righteous will see it and rejoice in iniquity. And of course, iniquity is not an individual. Iniquity has no mouth. So this is a figure for people who are iniquitous, right? People who do iniquity. All iniquity shall stop her mouth. Those who do iniquity will shut up. And praise God for that. We could use that, I'll tell you what. So the Psalms tell us about the end of iniquity. But the Psalms aren't the only place. And we'll mostly look at other places next time, but let's leave off looking quick at Daniel chapter 9. Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24. In Daniel 9:24, the angel Gabriel speaks to Daniel and says this to him in Daniel 9:24, 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city. And I think there's no doubt about it. These are weeks of years, not weeks of days. Now, the Bible has weeks of years, defined by a Sabbath year every 7th year. But these weeks of years, these 77s, are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city, Jerusalem and Israel. What are these 77s for? To finish the transgression, and to make an end of sins, and to make reconciliation for iniquity, and to bring in everlasting righteousness, and to seal up the vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. See, it's not just an end of the world where God brings in iniquity. There is going to be a long period of time of years wherein transgression is finished. No one's transgressing the law anymore. Sin is made an end of. Sin is not being done anymore. There is reconciliation made for iniquity. God's people are reconciled to him. Everlasting outflowing righteousness is brought into the earth. Not heaven, the earth. To seal up the vision and prophecy, that means to set the seal to them, to prove them true because they come true and happen. All these prophecies of the end of iniquity are going to happen. And to anoint the most holy. The temple will be restored, and God's true worship in his temple will continue. So through 70 weeks of years, there will be no sins in the nation of Israel, and I believe throughout the earth. God is going to bring an end to iniquity. And we'll talk more about how and when he does that. But though many might find it hard to believe, the Bible declares most clearly that this powerful and seemingly unending flood of wickedness and iniquity that we see on every hand will not be allowed to continue forever. The Bible's clear message is that God is going to step in and end it. Not through slowly working through his church, but ending it all at once. God has promised this in passage after passage in the Bible that speak of the end of iniquity. And it's our job not to question it, but to believe it. Believers, they don't question when God says he's going to do something. They don't say, I don't know. Maybe he will, maybe he won't, maybe he can't. Maybe he just means that symbolically. No, if we are believers, our job is not to question it, but to believe it. God will end iniquity. And we'll talk more about how and when he's going to do this in part 2.